in Ramayana, there is a whole process given how this was done. It was not just Ram Naam ki patthar fekhna. It was a whole engineering exercise that was undertaken where big boulders, big trunks of trees, all of that was taken. They were tied together. They were thrown in the sea. And using that, actually a whole construction exercise was undertaken. Once I started reading the text for what they were, I realized that what we think we know is usually just a distorted version of what the Itihaasa say, or just even a small part of it. The kind of analogies that Valmiki ji uses is just fantabulous. Yeah? When he's talking about warriors getting wounded, so he'll say their bodies lit up like Palash tree. So they were all wounded and they had blood coming out. He's of course saying they're wounded, but he gives that imagery of a Palash tree. There is no harm in looking at epics from present context. We need role models in life. So if there have been role models in the past, doesn't mean that we just accept them because they were there. We have to question, we have to ask, we have to see if that makes sense today as well.
Namaste and welcome to another episode of the Bharatvaarta podcast. We have with us today Ami Ganatra, author of the book Ramayana Unravelled. Of course, Amiji is no stranger to Bharatvaarta. She's been on the podcast multiple times, both as a guest and a host. Her earlier book, Mahabharata Unravelled, was a fascinating read. If you haven't checked it out, I think you should definitely check it out. I'll link it in the description. With Ramayana Unravelled, Amiji focuses on lesser-known facets of the Valmiki Ramayana, talking to us about characters and events that make up the epic. It's a fascinating read, as I was saying earlier. Again, please do check it out. We'll link to it in the description. On this podcast, we'll cover some of the elements of the book and also speak about, what we can learn from the many interesting stories that comprise the book. So without further ado, welcome Amiji. Thank you so much for being on Bharatvaarta.
Thank you so much. Namaste Roshan. It's always fun talking to you, and always being on Bharatvaarta. As you mentioned, I've been on either side, so it feels like home.
Awesome. Yeah. I can't wait to get started. I mean, there's just so much to cover. But, before we dive deeper into the book, I'd love to understand your fascination for Itihaasa. What is it about Itihaasa that kind of interests you, that makes you put in all of those long hours to, bring out book after book?
You must have heard the speech of our Prime Minister Modi ji for the Independence Day, right? He said, he told us about Pancha Prana, of which two things he said. Every Indian should do away with the mental slavery, mental colonization. And the second part he said was everybody should have pride in their heritage. Although we say 75 years of independence, as a nation, we are not 75 years. Our heritage, our civilization goes thousands of years back, right? So to have pride in our heritage, to have pride in our Itihaasa, history, we have to know what it is to begin with. My fascination with Itihaasa actually began with my questions regarding Itihaasa. Because, we've Ramayana, Mahabharata, call it mythology, call it Itihaasa, whatever it was known as, have been a part of our life. These stories have been with us for long. And even if people say it is mythology, the stories have built a narrative about how probably Bharat was centuries ago and how Bharat still is. So many a times when we talk about current problems, people will say, oh, but Mahabharata mein bhi to aisa tha, Ramayana mein bhi aisa tha. A lot of things that you carry on is from that time. So even though while they claim it is mythology and not true, for narrative building, a lot of these points were brought out, which were usually negative. And when all these discussions happened, my thought was that, what are these texts? If they talk about giving us a lesson, if they talk about really what Bharat was, then I am hearing very conflicting narratives. Yeah, one side it's the greatest books ever written, Mahabharata, Ramayana. On other side, they are supposed to stand for misogyny, casteism, whatnot. Yeah. And I was like, where is the truth here? It can't just be this way or that way, because then the way Itihaasa is defined in our Shastras is that Itihaasa is not just history. Itihaasa means something that happened in the past, Purvavrittam, Kathayuktam, narrated in a story format, but it had a purpose. And the purpose was to tell us about the four goals of life, or the Purushartha, Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. So if the purpose was leaving us with some wisdom, there has to be some consistency to these texts. That is where my research and my curiosity took me. And then once I started reading the text for what they were, I realized that what we think we know is usually just a distorted version of what the Itihasas say, or just even a small part of it. And there is so much depth to both the Itihasas that they actually have a lot to teach us even today. They are relevant even to this day, one, from our own learning perspective, and second, even to own our narrative and have pride in our heritage and the Itihas and the history that we represent. So that is where my fascination, so to say, of Itihas comes from.
Right. I think so often we get caught up with the history or mythological aspects of Itihaasa, right? I mean, did it really happen the way it was narrated, or is it something that's embellished? Is it something that is meant for us to glean from and learn all of these virtues and morals and whatnot? How should one approach the Itihaasa in that case?
I think I would just go back to the definition of Itihas. Did it happen from, so if we look at the Indic knowledge system, right? We have Shruti literature, we have Smriti literature. So Shruti are the Vedas. Smriti is broader. Smriti has Dharma Shastras. Smriti has Itihaasa. Smriti has the Vedangas. Smriti has the Puranas. Now, all these, if you see, we have a very wide and very detailed classification of books or literature. One is not called the other. So there is a reason behind having this classification, right? It was thought through, it was not random. One. In that, only two books are called Itihas, so to say, coming from ancient India, which is Mahabharata, Ramayana. The way Itihas, as I said, it is described as something that had happened in the past and narrated in a katha format. So when it is narrated in a katha format, there ought to be certain metaphors, which probably were given. There might be some hyperboles as well in that, which were meant to exaggerate, create an impact, whatever, make it easy to transfer that knowledge, but something that definitely happened in the past. So I would look at Itihas one in that manner, that the core story has happened. The core characters, the characterizations of Vyaktitwas are actually what the Itihas has. There might be some things which look to us as very unscientific today. I would say take it as metaphors. But even in that, Roshan, what is very fascinating is that some of the things which we think are metaphors and is non-scientific and stuff are actually not there in the Itihas. And I will take just a few examples, right? Like this, there is this thing where we say that to cross from Bharat, so the south of Bharat, to Lanka, the Vanar Sena, they threw stones. They wrote the word Ram on it and they threw stones, and it was the power of the name of Ram Naam ka ki Shakti thi, that the bridge was formed on its own. Yeah. And today's generation, people would be like, this doesn't happen. How does this happen? So probably the whole Ramayana did not happen. Now, interestingly, in Ramayana, there is a whole process given how this was done. It was not just Ram Naam ke patthar fekna. It was a whole engineering exercise that was undertaken, where big boulders, big trunks of trees, all of that was taken. They were tied together using different materials, different reeds, and all of that. They were thrown in the sea, and using that, actually a whole construction exercise was undertaken to build that bridge. So it was not so random. Yeah. And when you think of it this way, you're like, yeah, okay, now this makes sense. Right. So a lot of these metaphors actually weren't even there in the original, the actual Valmiki Ramayana or Vyasa's Mahabharata for that matter.
Right. So this is your second book, right? I mean, the earlier one was Mahabharata Unravelled. What is unique about Ramayana, say in contrast to Mahabharata? And in particular, why did you choose the Valmiki Ramayana, aside from the fact that, of course, it's the oldest known reference?
So I'll answer the second one first. And this is true because both for Valmiki Ramayana and Vyasa's Mahabharata. As I said, my focus has been Itihaasa rather than retellings. So for both Ramayana and Mahabharata, what is Itihaasa? Like, for example, especially in Ramayana, there is a known concept that there are 300 plus Ramayans, right? Which Ramayana do you take? Now, interestingly, all the retellings of Ramayana, including Kamba Ramayana and Ramcharitmanas, the most famous one, Ramcharitmanas, they start with worshipping Valmiki, with Rishi Valmiki, right? So they also do not claim that we have done something of our own, something new. They say we have based it off Valmiki Ramayana. So clearly, if we have to think of Itihaasa, so if there, we have to go back to Valmiki Ramayana or Vyasa's Mahabharata, right? So if there is a conflict in narration, I would rather believe what I read in the Valmiki Ramayana manuscript as we have on this date versus what we have in the other retellings. Also, when Valmiki ji was writing or composing Ramayana, or Vyas ji was composing Mahabharata, they were doing it, they were narrating a story of people they knew. In Mahabharata, his own family, so to say. And in Valmiki ji's time, his own contemporary. Ram was king, Sri Ram was the king at that time when Valmiki ji lived, right? So he was narrating the Itihaasa for the benefit of people who come after them. So for all of us, for people who've come after that. Whereas in the other retellings, what has happened is people tend to project their view of how they see Sri Ram or Hanuman or all of that, right? For example, Ramcharitmanas, and I am saying this with utmost respect, is a very, very fascinating book, very fascinating retelling with a lot of bhakti bhav, which was probably needed when Tulsidas ji wrote it, right? It was needed, that it was important that people had that bhakti bhav, because there was nothing else to hold on to. They were living under the Mughal repression, so to say, at that time, right? Even living your dharma was difficult. So at that time, what do you hold on to? That Shraddha Bhav was needed. And Sri Ram was the Ishta of Tulsidas ji. So when he writes Ramcharitmanas, he has a particular image of Sri Ram in mind, particular bhav which he shares with who he calls his Ishta, and he writes about it. Whereas Valmiki Ramayana is how things happened, is largely what how things happened. And that is why I would rather refer to the original as we have on date versus the retellings, and just from an Itihaasic point of view. Otherwise, rasa, bhakti, all that is there in others as well.
Right. And the first part of my question, what is unique about Ramayana, say, in contrast to the Mahabharata?
So Mahabharata is a more complex story. It has lots of characters, lots of things going on at every point in time. There is one central family, so to say, of Pandavas and Kauravas, and there is a central figure of Krishna. But again, everybody has a larger role to play, right? Everybody is involved, doing something, taking actions, having problems, going through Dharma Sankat and all of that. So there's a lot more going on. Ramayana, on the other hand, is about the life of Sri Ram. And you see that in the name as well, right? It's Ramayana. It's about Ram. It's about taking refuge in Sri Ram. Mahabharata is about Bharat Vamsha. So it's a lot more, it's a lot bigger grantha than what Ramayana is. However, from a point of view of lessons related to Dharma per se, or lessons related to living our lives, they are both not very different. Ramayana is maybe relatively less complex because it is about, largely it revolves around the life and times of Sri Ram. But the Dharma Sankat that he goes through, even though limited compared to what we see in Mahabharata, his understanding of Dharma in those situations and his dealing with Dharma in those situations is actually not different from what we see of Krishna's in Mahabharata. Yeah. And the reason I want to underline this point is because more often it is told that Ram Maryada Purushottam, for him end didn't matter, only the means mattered. So to that extent that sometimes it almost feels like, why is he being so stubborn in the normal usual narration that we tend to know, yeah, not in Valmiki Ramayana. So it almost feels like, oh my god, he's so stubborn. Whereas Krishna, it seems like he could do anything just to meet the end goal. So means didn't matter at all, and only the goal mattered. But what is the reality? So if we actually analyze both Sri Ram and Sri Krishna's lives and their decision making, we really can't fit them into one versus the other. They did what they needed to do for end goal of Dharma Sansthapan, for ensuring that the right precedent was set and the right justice was delivered the way it should. So interestingly, both these are very similar, then actually different when it comes to the lessons that we derive from it. But that's been at least my observation of the two.
No, certainly interesting. I think the underlying theme of dharma, right? Doing what is required in different situations is certainly common in both Mahabharata and Ramayana. Again, before we delve into the characters and whatnot, from a literary perspective, right? I mean, obviously, this is an epic. It dwarfs the Iliad or Homer, and around 24,000 verses, perhaps or more. I don't know, right? And written in the Anustupa Chanda that you mentioned, which is a very complex mathematical structure. Could you talk about the more literary aspects of the Ramayana?
So Ramayana, it is said and it is true. Yeah, the both Mahabharata and Ramayana are in Anushtup Chanda, but Ramayana tends to come across as a lot more sweet. lot more rasayukta. The kind of analogies that Valmiki ji uses is just fantabulous. Yeah. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So when he's talking about Ram or warriors getting wounded, so he'll say their bodies lit up like palash tree. So palash tree is like, it has like red flowers. Yeah. So they were all wounded and they had blood coming out. So he's not saying, he's of course saying they're wounded, but he gives that imagery of a palash tree. Similarly, when Hanumanji sees Sita sitting in the Ashok Vatika, of course she's in a lot of pain, but her aura is still there. Yeah, even in that pain, even in like she's all over, like she's not taken bath for so long, right? So there's like mud all over her, but still her aura comes out. And the way he describes, so he I have actually mentioned that bit in the book as well, like the way he describes, yeah, like she seems to be a hope, but a hope which is getting broken, but still the hope is there. So the way he gives an analogies is just extremely beautiful. I think even better than Mahabharata in a lot of ways. Now, because I can't claim to be a Sanskrit expert, so to say, mine is a very working knowledge. I can't probably comment on more on maybe other literary aspects, but these are some which are really big. So it's a lot more poetic. Even the description of seasons, for that matter, yeah. Valmiki Ramayana is just a very, very descriptive text. The way he describes different seasons. So he'll talk about the different trees, how the flowers are coming out, different analogies, how the rivers are flowing, and all of that. So it just becomes very live in front of you, live and beautiful. You feel like you're sitting there and actually being with Sri Ram while you're there. So yeah, these were some aspects which I picked.
Yeah, no, it's certainly a lot more evocative as well, I think, right? Oftentimes we tend to impose these modern tropes of either liberalism or feminism or, what is right or not in the present context on these epics. If I were to look at it without any political bias and see it as an intellectually honest endeavor, right? Maybe it is to understand these characters and events from a present day context, like how it relates to us in 2022. What would you say is wrong with that? Or, how should we look at it?
There is no harm in looking at epics from present context. I think that's fine. Yeah. Because I do think that every generation needs a hero or heroine to look up to. We need role models in life. So if there have been role models in the past, doesn't mean that we just accept them because they were there. We have to question, we have to ask, we have to see if that makes sense today as well. And this is actually not at all in contrast to what our epics have said. So it's very fascinating. Every time they talk of Sri Ram or Yudhishthir or Sri Krishna, they'll say they are Deshakalavit. Deshakalavit means they understand the context of time and space. What does it mean to understand the time and space? So things change. There are some things which remain permanent. That is why we call Sanatan Dharma. But otherwise, value systems might change, customs might change, traditions might change, right? Accordingly, some of the rules, regulations which existed in a society in a certain way need to change. Accordingly, if there were role models that people looked up to in the past, they might change as well. So I'm completely okay with questioning the heroes, yeah, while stating upfront that I actually am a believer and I have a lot of faith in general in both Sri Ram and Sri Krishna. Yeah, like for me, Krishna is Krishna. Everything is related to Krishna. But anyways, but I still think questioning is important, and all our texts have questions, right? In Bhagavad Gita, the number of questions Arjun has asked, he just goes on and on. It's not as if Krishna is like, "Arey, maine bol diya na, ab kuch puchna nahi hai." Nahi, he keeps asking questions. Kathopanishad is about Nachiketa asking questions to Yama himself, right? So there are lots of these things. But how should we see that? I think what is important, Roshan, I believe, is that many times we tend to question wanting to dismiss something. And that I think is not okay from our own learning perspective. Let's question trying to understand. That is one. Second, even while questioning, we have to be aware about what could have been a social structure in those time and age, because technology was different. Yeah, technology plays a huge role in how systems and societies evolve, right? That was different. That is why the roles defined for men, women could have been different. They were more defined, let's say, rather than it is today. So making these, having these points laid down, then we question. Now the question should be, if say we say, like it is largely said, right? You didn't ask it, but I'm going to say it anyways. It is generally believed that Ramayana is all about misogyny. Always, yeah. They'll quickly come to this. Why? Because that one incident. Ram left Sita. They'll say Ram left Sita, misogyny. Pregnant lady, he left. But how do you define? Again, it goes back to thinking, right? And that is why understanding Itihaasa is so important. When we label somebody as something or some situation as something, how should we do that? There has to be a trend in that behavior. Can just one incident make a person this or that? Yes, Ram could have been misogynistic if he showed that trait again and again throughout Ramayana. But is that true? Absolutely not. On the other hand, his entire life has been shaped by the women he was with, right? His whole going to forest was because of Kaikeyi. Kaikeyi demanded it and it happened. Now imagine if a woman was oppressed and depressed and had no right, how could Kaikeyi have made it happen, right? That clearly shows how powerful she was, even in front of Dashrath. He did not, so Ram was initially not going to take Sita, right? He wanted Sita to decide whether to come or not in the jungle, and he told her very clearly about how dangerous that could be. Sita insisted she wanted to go. It was Sitaji's decision to go to the jungle. She was not forced into the jungle. She wanted to go. The episode of the deer, the multi-hued deer, Lakshman says very, very clearly that there cannot be a deer like this. Sita ji still insisted that no, I want the deer come what may. Yeah. And she gives all these beautiful explanation why she wants a deer. And at that point, Ram is like, okay, if this is making her so happy, and if anyways there's a Rakshasa, I should go and get it. Again, Sita ji is insisting. After that, when Marich tries to deceive them by making that imitating Ram's voice, Lakshman again says that no, we don't have to believe it. I'm not going to leave you alone. He tells Sita ji, but Sita is like, no, come what may, you have to go. And the words she uses, like, seriously, the stuff, she literally gives galis to Lakshman, yeah? And he's so perturbed at the end of it that he's like, okay, fine, I can't take this anymore and I'll go. Again, is this a woman who's oppressed and depressed? No, she's making her decisions, right? Then, okay, he goes, and then the whole Ravan episode happens. Then even Ravan coming to get Sita is because Shurpanakha has lied to him that there is this lady who's so beautiful and who can only be your wife. Because Shurpanakha knows that there is no other way Ravan will go and capture Sita and she will get her revenge. So she is the other lady in the life, in Ram's whenever. So how is Ram, when he's actually just behaved in accordance with what the women wanted, how is he misogynistic? Yeah, at all. Like, how do we even claim that? Now, in this situation, if there is one situation which comes across like this, shouldn't we ask a question that if he has never behaved like this, maybe my labeling of this incident is actually not correct? And maybe there is more to it which I need to ask and question and find out. This has to be our approach to understanding Itihaasa. Long answer, but I think this is important because this is how narrative building happens.
No, absolutely. I think, seeing things in context and in perspective is so important, right? I mean, and not just viewing one event or one instance as a depiction of a certain character, especially someone as complex, right? And something as complex as the epic as well, right? A lot of it, I think, is a lot of the problems are from our desire for fast food answers, right? I mean, is this right or is this wrong? Is this way or that way? Whereas I think things have to be seen a lot more in perspective. Nassim Taleb has this phrase called retrospective bigoteering, right? I mean, when you look at people of the past or characters of the past from the present lens and judge them with the values of the current context or values and even context of today, right? In that sense, there are so many timeless sort of dilemmas that are answered in the Ramayana, right? One of the most beautiful elements I feel in the book is Bhagwan Ram talks about destiny, right? And it begs the eternal question, how much of life is preordained versus how much of it is in our control. And here you have referenced Krishna's discourse in the Gita as well. I would love for you to speak more about that.
So this is one of my favorite episodes from Ramayana and of course Gita, but from Ramayana because typically we tend to think कि Ramji went to Vanvas because father ने बोला है, पापा ने बोला है तो करना है, पितृ भक्त. Yeah, that was the only thing we've been told. This generation questions that if the father is wrong, would you still just agree to him just because he said it? Like, what if he's wrong, right? Would you still agree to it? And when I actually read Ramayana, I was like, wow, this is so much deeper than what we tend to think it is. So, of course, it was Pitru Bhakti, no doubt about that. He says that you have to listen to your father, who's also here the king. So, if you're ready to accept his Rajyabhishek decision, you should be ready to accept the other decision of Vanvas as well. So, that is definitely one part. But when Lakshman is extremely upset, and like we asked this question that what if the father is wrong? Should you still believe? And at that time, Sri Ram explains why he has agreed to go on Vanvas. He says, till date, I have never done anything that will make Kaikeyi wish bad for me. Never. I have never discriminated between my three mothers. And even more importantly, Kaikeyi has never done anything that would make me feel she doesn't like me, right? She has always loved me even more than Bharat. So for her to think of sending me to vanvas and cause me pain is actually something that I can't even imagine her doing. It is not normal. Kaikai behaving like this is also not normal. Yeah. And when did it happen? It could have happened before. The talks of Rajabhishek and all that were going on, right? It could have happened before. But it happened just at the time when he was going to be crowned. So literally the night before the Rajabhishek. So Ram says, sometimes things take a turn in such a way which are completely out of your control and not even out of your own doing. You don't know why that happened. And suddenly it seems like you've lost control of everything. What do you do in that case, right? What do you do in that case? You can crib, you can complain, you can fight. That is one thing. The second is you say, okay, maybe there's something else that is meant to happen, which I can't make sense of right now. After having done all that I could do, still things have gone in a way which they shouldn't have, which I think shouldn't have happened. That means there is clearly something else that might be in store. But that something else we will only know if we let ourselves go with the flow. And this situation is clearly that, right? And to me, this lesson was very, very important because if you see today's context, right, one situation not going our way and we are all over the place, we are depressed, we are anxious, we are, out there not knowing what to do. This is the way I think if we deal with life in this way, where we do what we must do, but believe in that aspect of destiny, not even destiny, maybe, call it whatever you want, but that aspect where something else might be in store for you, but you will only know when you allow yourself to go that way, right? And we have so many examples of leaders today as well who suffered failures, and that failure actually took them to where they are currently, to their successes. So yeah, so this was the aspect which I was very, very fascinated with.
Yeah, I just loved the five things that you mentioned, right? The
Yeah.
doer, the instruments being used, place, time, and approach, activities, process, and then destiny. It's just a fascinating way to look at things.
Maybe I can add a little bit to that. Yeah. So this part comes from Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna is explaining to Arjun. So he's told him till now, ki, do your karma, because karma is in your control. The results are not. But if the results are not in your control, then what do you do? Why should you even work? So then he says there are five aspects which will define success. The four of them are in your control. Hence, you must still act. Which are those four? The doer, the activities, the situation in which you are, the processes, all of that. And the fifth, the instrument. And the fifth is the daivat. Fifth is the destiny. Only after you do those four can you leave it to destiny. You can't just say, Acha, I won't do this also and leave it to destiny. Because then, no, that is just running away from the situation.
Let's look at some of the characters, beginning with Bhagwan Ram itself. He is known as the ideal, the epitome of Dharma, someone we should all strive to be, but we can never emulate. But from a literary sense, one also gets the sense that he is obstinate in his ways, right? As you mentioned earlier, whether it is in adhering to his father's wishes, or even though those wishes were, ill-advised, or in testing Sita Ma's character, right? And we often hear this in contrast with Bhagwan Sri Krishna as well, as you mentioned, that the latter was a little more pragmatic. Could you talk to us a little more about Bhagwan Rama's character arc? How was he, and what we can learn from him?
So there are adjectives within Ramayana used for Sri Ram. Yeah. One, as I mentioned, he's called Desha Kalavit, one who understands the context of time and place. He's called Purush Antara Kovida, one who understands people very well. He understands psychology of people very well. Yeah. He also knows who is good at what. So he's very good at figuring out who is resourceful in what situation. Yeah. Again, there is usually a thing, like you mentioned, stubborn. There's also this idea that he never showed emotions, he was never angry. Yeah, no, no, not at all. Even Naradji, when he's describing Sri Ram, he says that he's himavan eva dhairyavan. He's dhairyavan, he's cool, calm headed, he has a lot of fortitude like the Himalayas. But when he's angry, kal agni eva krodhe, when he's angry, he's like kal agni, he can burn anything and everything. Yeah. So he had Krodha, but the quality told again is fascinating. It is said Amogha Krodha Harshaha. Amogha means that never fails. Krodha Harsha. So his Krodha and Harsha did not fail. In the sense, It was not that he did not get angry, or it was not that he was never happy. But even in his happiness and his growth, it was a purpose. He was not impulsive. His decision making was not impulsive. He is quite impulsive in showing his emotion, and we see that throughout. Yeah, when Sita ji is kidnapped, how distraught Sri Ram is, how he goes around and screams that if I don't see Sita anymore, I'm going to destroy this whole world. Yeah, that also he says. So he's really destroyed. So it's not as if he doesn't show emotions. He does. Just that when it comes to decision making, he does not let emotions overpower his decision making, and he does not miss out on objectivity. Yeah. Now, is being
Yeah.
objective stubborn? No. We say that because we tend to not understand why he's doing what he did. We just spoke about this one example of him agreeing to his father's wish. It was not just because, oh, पिता का बात मानना है तो मानना है. नहीं, नहीं. There is a deeper reasoning behind it. The other thing is, we say Krishna versus Ram, right? How did Sri Ram kill Vali? पीछे से मारा. And then a lot of people cannot digest it. कि पीछे से कैसे मारा? So there are a lot of theories that are floated about how there was a right reason for पीछे से मारना. But in Valmiki Ramayana, no. Sri Ram is very clear that I had to kill you from behind only because I was not fighting with you. I was punishing you. So he accepts he killed Vali from behind. Yeah. Again, this was not somebody who cares only for the means and not for the end goal, right? He wanted to achieve the end goal. He wanted to ensure that Vali is out of the way so Sugriv can get the throne, and Sugriv will be helpful to him. But also, of course, this was in line with Dharma. He knew Vali was wrong. He knew Vali was bullying. So that was also the case. But to get him out, he knew that fighting Vali is not going to help. It had to happen in some other way. And it was a punishment. It was a clear-cut punishment for violating his brother's wife, his younger brother's wife. So he's done that. Third, when Vibhishan comes, again, means versus goals, the whole stubborn thing, right? If he was that stubborn, he'd be like, nay, I don't want to know what are the secrets of the enemy, right? You've come to me, that's it, I accept you. And that also the usual narration is he's just taken because Vibhishan comes to seek his shelter, and because he's Bhakta Vatsala, he will give shelter. Of course, that is an aspect as well. But it is very interesting. The first question which Sri Ram asks Vibhishan as soon as Vibhishan comes is that tell me about the fortifications of Lanka. Tell me the secrets of how strong the army is. Tell me all of that. And remember that I am going to kill Ravan and everybody who's in support of him, right? Is this a man who's not pragmatic? He's a man who's extremely pragmatic. And that is why Ram Rajya was possible, right? What is Ram Rajya? Ram Rajya is a place where all citizens are happy. There is a lot of prosperity, there is samriddhi, everybody is doing what they are doing, there is rule of law. This cannot happen unless and until there is empathy and there is pragmatism. To be that, one needs to be practical in life, to be objective in life, right? And Ram was that. Sri Ram was that. So bucketing even Krishna as, does whatever he wants, or Sri Ram as one who very, very stubborn, goals don't matter, only means no. I think that none of that is right. And as I said, Dharma Sansthapan was the goal for all of them, for both of them, and they lived up to it.
No, fantastic. I think one of the highlights is the book is how it talks about these various facets of Bhagwan Ram as well, right? I mean, because we often know him as the even-keeled person, and I was certainly fascinated when I realized how distraught he was at losing Sitama. And some of the other aspects as well. So let's talk about Sitama. In some interpretations, she's seen almost as diffident to Bhagwan Ram. But in your book, she's quite the contrary, right? I mean, you show that she's her own woman in every way. Could you talk to us about her character, how she was?
So of course Sita was her own woman, and I'll take those examples. But let me say one more thing. Yeah, even the society in general was not such which was oppressing women, and there are a couple of examples around that. One is when they talk about Kaushalya Ma. Even she is supposed to, she's considered, more often than not, who's always sad and diffident and stuff. But Lakshman, when Sri Ram tells Lakshman that you stay back because who will take care of our mothers, and Lakshman is like, oh, we don't have to worry at all about that because Kaushalya Ma will take care of Sumitra Ma. Kaushalya Ma has like 1,000 villages under her. So she's completely financially independent. The money came to her. The queens, of course, Kaikeyi's character, we know how strong it was. So even Kaushalya Ma, she was financially independent. When they are leaving for vanvas, and Kaikeyi is, giving that valkal, the dress they have to wear in the jungle to Sita Ma, that time Guru Vasishtha is very upset. And he's like, a lady is like the Atma of the man. Yeah, she's the Atma of her husband. And Sita is the Atma of Ram. So she will, Medinim Palishyati, she is not going to go to the jungle. She will stay here and she will rule Ayodhya as the queen of Ayodhya on the name of Ram. So they are also saying that, and he could have only said that if Sita's character was also such, right, where they believed that she could have ruled one. Now coming to Sita Ma herself, every decision of hers, like going to the jungle, wanting what she wanted, all of that are her own, as I mentioned before as well, right? But I think what we tend to forget sometimes, or why that diffidence is given to her, is because she is also a pativrata. She does all her duties towards her family, to especially towards her husband, as she should. And we somehow think that that itself is diffidence. No, not at all. Everybody, when you think of rights, you need to fulfill your responsibilities as well. And that framework of responsibilities and rights, rather than responsibilities versus rights, comes across very clearly in our Itihaasa text. That is one. The other thing is her character. So, as I said, like she insisted on going to vanvas, and to the extent, like she actually, when Ram is trying to discourage her, she says, "Oh, I thought my father, so maybe my father doesn't know that he's actually married me to a lady in the room of a man. He thought he's married me to a warrior, but that's not the case, because you are telling me that I'll be, afraid there. So won't you take care of me?" And Ram was like, "Okay, no, I will take care of you, but I cannot force this decision on you. This decision has to be yours. But now that you have taken this call, I am here to take care of you." But I could not have forced this decision on you. So the decision is hers. As I mentioned, when she wants the deer, she wants the deer. She talks about it. With Lakshman, the way how, confidently, and even to the extent of like abusing him, she's used all those words. So this lady, throughout, when we see her, she's a very, very strong character. Let's look at what happens even in Lanka. She is in a very deplorable state, no doubt about it. But look at her conviction, look at her Vyaktitva, the strength of her Vyaktitva. She does not give in. Any other lady could have broken, but she does not break down at all. She sticks to her position. She does not entertain Ravan at all. And when she actually had the opportunity to go or to leave with Hanuman, when Hanuman goes to see her, right? When Hanuman figures out that she's an Ashok Vatika, and she also believes that Sri Ram has sent Hanuman, Hanumanji tells her that, "Why don't you come with me? Why stay here anymore? You come with me, I'll take you back safely." And she says, "No. One, of course, there is a danger of me falling, but the more importantly, there will be I don't want a stigma on my husband's head that he could not protect his wife. I will not be able to live with that. And hence, he has to come and defeat Ravan and take me back." This is also her call. So, like Sri Ram, we talk about this agnipariksha, which is also her decision, by the way. Ram, of course, tells her stuff which sound really harsh. And she says that if you don't trust me, I will take agnipariksha. So, the giving that agnipariksha is her call, of course. But that, as Ram says, Ram is like, "It's never as if I did not trust you. I had full trust in you. Ravan could never have done anything to you. You are like, the aura of the sun. The aura of the sun cannot leave the sun. That way you can never leave me. And I know that completely. But I did not want the society to think that you were unfaithful, or I did not want that stigma on your head." Is it any different from how Sita is thinking about it, right? She could have gone. This whole war could have been avoided. This whole thing about having to make a bridge, nothing would have been required if she would have left. But she didn't, because she cared that her husband shouldn't be given a bad name. Exactly what eventually also Ram does. So that also shows her character for sure, but also the kind of a bond they share, Ram and Sita.
Yeah, what I found fascinating was also that aspect when Lakshman proposes that, hey, Dashratha is not in his senses, and I think we should depose the king, and at that time Kaushalyama also doesn't really oppose that, right? I mean, she's okay with that, I suppose. Yeah, so that is also fascinating. But let's talk about the Agni Pariksha and the later banishing of Sitama at the end, right? It said that Bhagwan Ram first had a duty to the people and then to his own family, and that's how a ruler should be, right? But what would you say to all of the feminists who might be kind of shrieking at the thought of these ordeals?
I should also caveat this. So there are a lot of people who believe that Uttarakhand, where this episode of Sri Ramji giving up on Sita, or the pregnant Sitama, they believe that this never happened because this comes in Uttarakhand, and Uttarakhand is a later day edition. So a lot of people believe that. There is other school of thought which says nahi, aisa nahi hai. It is a part of Ramayana as well, and also because both the critical edition and Gita Press edition, they have Uttarkand in them. Now, I was in a fix that what should I do? Should I take Uttarkand or not? Right now, I am not a scholar to say, oh, for 10 reasons I believe this, hence I will leave out Uttarakhand. Because Uttarakhand also has very interesting stories which sort of make for very interesting reading, which I've added in the book. So it would have been very intellectually dishonest for me to say I will take some part and I will leave out the rest because I find it inconvenient. Hence, I have taken Uttarakhand, and this episode I have put it in the epilogue where I have added my views to this. So, to the question that you have, Roshan, I think there is any situation in life, right? It's very easy, as I said, to put labels on a person and say, nahi, nahi, this way or that way. Now, I would turn this question around and say, what if Sri Ram had actually not given up on Sita and he had given up his kingdom? Because something he had to do. It was not as simple as some dhobi saying, aisa nahi tha. It was like widespread in the kingdom. If I assume Uttarakhand to be right, this was widespread in the kingdom that Ram has done something wrong by accepting Sita back, and it is leading to unacceptable behavior in the subjects as well. Yeah, so that was a widespread thing. Now we have to understand that at that time, the king's position was next to only God's. A king's nyay was nyay. So that meant that a king had to be above any kind of shanka, above any kind of doubt, right? And this is not just true for India. Or Bharat at that time. We have a saying as well, right? Like Caesar's wife has to be over any kind of doubt, basically. So this was everywhere because king had that position. So establishing that credibility is very, very important, was very, very important at that time. Now, had Sri Ram said that, no, I don't trust, I won't do anything which the Janta wants, I will still keep my wife. It was a very delicate situation for him. Because what was his father called? His father was called that, he was kami. He gave in to his wife, although the wife was wrong. He was that kami. He gave up dharma for his own lust. The same thing we would have spoken about Sri Ram today as well. So the situation what Sri Ram was on was between the devil and the deep sea. Yeah. Either side, either decision would not have been optimum. And he still had to take a call in that situation, right? Now, this is so true for our own lives. So rather than judging Sri Ram, I would say there is a lesson for us here that what do we do in a situation like this where both options that we are faced with are suboptimal. Here is a man who loves this woman. He crossed like 100 yojanas, went to Lanka, got her back, right? He loves her immensely that he was willing to destroy the entire universe for her. He never gets married again. He could have, right? It was not, polygamy was not like rare at that time. In fact, polygamy was a norm at that time. But he doesn't, even after letting Sita go. It was an extremely painful decision for him to make. But a decision had to be made because on the other side was a much greater responsibility. And he chose that greater responsibility. However, would we say that the decision was fair on Sita Ma? No, right? That is the Dharma Sankat, right? How do you deal in this situation? The situation was not at all fair on Sita Ma. But that doesn't by itself make Ram wrong. He was in the position where he had to take a call. And actually, Sita understands that. So she does not hold a grudge against Ram even at that point. But eventually, in the end, when it comes to it where Sri Ram says, no, you take a pledge again. You take a pledge again and I take you back. That time Sita Ma becomes even a bigger person. And she says, not anymore. I will take a pledge. You want me to take a pledge? I will take a pledge. But coming back is not an option anymore. Because not anymore will I allow anyone to hinder or harm my self-respect. Now is the question of my self-respect. That I won't do. I will take the pledge nevertheless, but I won't come back. And she doesn't come back. So was it fair on Sita? Not at all. And she does what she needed to do as a woman. She stood up for herself. But that doesn't make Ram misogynistic in any way. It is a dharma sankat that he was faced with in that position. What would we expect out of our leaders, right? Of course, as I said, values change. At that point, running away from the kingdom was not an option that Ram had.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I think a couple of things. One is that we tend to privilege rights over responsibilities at this point of time, largely, and so for us to understand that context is quite difficult. And also, as you said, there is no one clear right answer in a lot of cases, right? I mean, it's about choosing the greater good, and you can argue like for all of these reasons, there was Ram Rajya and people lived happily afterwards, right? Which never would have happened but for these difficult decisions that had to be taken. When we look at certain modern interpretations of Ramayana, often they have a softer view of Ravan. Right, he's seen as a scholar, someone who acquired powers through intense tapasya, but somehow unfortunately he gave into fallibilities that every person somehow faces. That is kind of the character arc that we see. What would you say to that?
So there is truth to that, right? He got his strengths because of his tapasya. Of course, the tapasya itself were meant came out of ahankar or out of that need that he wanted power. But once he got it, of course, he put an effort to do that, right? Tapasya karna is not easy. So when he needed to put in the effort, he did put in the effort. And going forward, that ahankar, that power went into his head. He had a soft corner for women. He was extremely lustful to the extent that he started even neglecting his own kingdom. Yeah, all that is very true. And in fact, Mandodari sums it up extremely well in the end. So after Ravan is dead, Mandodari comes out and she says, you won over the world by controlling your senses, by keeping your senses in check. Now it seems like the senses took out their revenge on you by overpowering you and leading to your downfall, right? This is exactly true. This is exactly true. But the soft corner around Ravan is usually, which we just had Raksha Bandhan, and there will always be this message going on that, Are bhai ho to Ravan jaisa. Yeah, he went and fought against Ram just because Ram, whatever, punished his sister. They'll say things like, oh, and he waited for consent, like feminism 101, right? Consent, consent. He did not touch Sita. Now, did he not touch Sita? Yes. Yeah, I mean, did he not try to violate Sita? Yes, he did not. He expected Sita to come to him on his own. But was it because he cared for consent? Not at all. There were 1,000 women whom he had violated by then, right? But he was aware of multiple curses on his head by then, that if he tried to violate one more lady, a curse would, take place, and his brain, or basically, it would take away all his power and he would be killed. And this also was pronounced by Brahmadev himself, from whom he got the Vardhan to begin with, the boon to begin with. That was playing on his head. So it was not because he cared for Sita's consent, but because he was forced to. Yeah. And even the whole Shurpanakha thing, as I told you, it was not because he cared what happened to Shurpanakha. It was because Shurpanakha lied to him. Shurpanakha said, I was punished because Sita is like a money. She is this beautiful lady who you deserve her to be your wife. And I was trying to get her for you when they punished me, because I was trying to get her for you. And by then, Ravan was so much overpowered by lust that he was like, nothing else matters now. I just want this lady. So it was not out of any love for his sister. Yeah? In fact, it is said that his sister, Shurpanakha's husband, Vidyutjiva, was actually killed by Ravan in a war. So
Yeah.
that angle is also there. So yeah, it's even then there is a story about Ravan being a Shiva Bhakta. Was he a Shiva Bhakta? Yes, but was it because out of bhakti, or was it a forced thing? He had no way out. So yeah, that is also an interesting story which I'll not disclose. Let people read the book.
Just a slight detour, right? I mean, oftentimes in these epics, we see that the gods grant this vardhan, and as a consequence, there is chaos, right? I often wonder, like, why do that, right? I mean, is it life would be so much more simpler if some of these folks did not have these kind of powers to cause chaos, right? But why do you think that is?
So, our Sanskriti, our thought process is all based on karma siddhanta, the philosophy of karma. If one does the right karma, puts in the right effort, there will be benefits to it. Material benefits, for sure. Now, if that karma then is channelized in the wrong direction, there will be consequences to that as well. So all these people who did tapasya to get power, they actually did put in effort, right? That effort was definitely put in with the conviction, with all the parishram that was required. So they got it. Of course, when they asked for boons which could not have been negated eventually, they did not get it. So even Ravan wanted immortality, that he did not get. Yeah. In all these cases, They were given boons to the extent that there could be a way out if they became a nuisance. Of course, that took a lot of time, and then all this, we talk about avatars taking place. But when you put in the effort, the results will come. How can that not happen if we talk about the karma siddhantas? And that's how I would see it, right? Even today, when we talk about a lot of these underworld mafia and stuff, it doesn't come easy to them. They are putting an effort, just that that effort is in the wrong direction. So while you would still get the material benefits of your effort, eventually it will also lead to your downfall, because the intent behind it, the way you've acquired it, is all wrong. So the karma phala of that also will come to you eventually. There is no running away from it. That's the whole thing. There is no running away from your karma phala. That is the underlying theme of our shastras as well. That's how I see this.
Yeah, no, it's certainly true. I think in the many stories that we see, right, I think one of the common tropes is that there is an action and a reaction in proportion. Say, King Dashratha killing Ravan and then dying alone without his sons, right, or his wives. Do you think that is the basis of Dharma, I mean, or the natural law, or, is there more to it?
So karma, this is definitely karma siddhanta. Yeah, karma siddhanta is like what we say, right? That whatever you do, there will be phal. Karma phal will be there. There is no running away from it. Now, what is dharma? And that is why then dharma comes into play, right? So the way I understand dharma is that overarching principle which allows sustenance. Like dharma itself, the word comes from dhru, which is to sustain, to uphold. Yeah. So, what does it uphold? It upholds the system that it works on. We could talk about Bharatvaarta, we could talk about our individual communities, any system, we can talk about our professions. The overarching principle which allows that system to survive and thrive, that is Dharma. Yeah. Now, how will that system survive and thrive? Only through the actors in that system, which is us. Now, if we want, say, our organization to succeed, how will it succeed if all the stakeholders are aligned in our goals, working towards making that organization successful, doing our duty, kartavya, towards that system? In that, and then of course, the system itself then ensures that we are also taken care of. We get our promotions, we get our salaries, so that we continue to do what we do, right? So, dharmo rakshati rakshitaha. We take care of the system takes care of us. Now, in that, if somebody becomes larger than life and starts doing things which hamper the system per se, what will happen? In an organization, that person will be thrown out. Even if that person was very, very successful to begin with, he led the institute to a certain level. But if he becomes harmful through his actions, the system will throw him out, right? If the system needs to survive, else the system will collapse along with that person. This is what dharma is. And to make dharma happen, or to make it possible, is the karma siddhanta. You do, you get what you do, because else the system itself will fall apart. The whole dharmic system will not survive. So you see how beautifully linked these concepts are, the dharma and karma siddhanta and all of that, and so real even in today's world and context.
Yeah, really wonderful. Lakshmana and Lord Hanuman, they're often portrayed as side actors, and not much is known about them aside from their devotion to Bhagwan Ram. Could you talk to us about them? What were their character attributes like, and what can we learn from them?
Lakshman, I think for me, Lakshman was the find of actually reading Valmiki Ramayana. His is one of the most beautiful characters in Valmiki Ramayana. Typically he's understood as somebody who is always angry, an angry young man. Was he like that? No. He was. Of course, he was angry. He could be impulsive when it was required. As we saw in the beginning, when Dashrath asks Ram to leave and Ram agrees, and Lakshman, as you mentioned, right? Vadhyatamba. Let's either imprison him or let's kill him, because what he's doing is wrong. And he gets very angry and all that. But over time, while they are in the jungle, after Sita gets kidnapped, the way Lakshman stands by Ram. So is he a side character? Well, yes, the story focuses on Ram. But is he not important? Not. He is extremely important. He is that pillar which has held Ram together, especially after Sita was kidnapped, right? Even during the jungle, like he is one person who's doing all the hard work. All the physical hard work is being done by Lakshman. After Sita is kidnapped, Ram was so emotionally broken, so distraught, so emotionally broken. So at every point in time when Ram needed Lakshman, Ram needed emotional support, Lakshman was there. and he knew exactly what would work for Ram. Yeah. So sometimes he will say things which actually don't make logical sense. He'll say things like, "Oh, you are facing all this because you did not follow your dharma and you left Ayodhya." Yeah, things like that. Because he knows that will provoke Ram into action. Yeah. So he would say things not because it's the right or the wrong thing, because he knew at that point in time that is what Ram needed to hear to get out of his anxiety, to get out of his depression. Yeah. And it comes out so beautifully in every incident that, Ram is down and Lakshman tries to keep him together. So Lakshman is that pillar that made Ram what Ram is. In fact, a lot of times when Ram is angry, right, Lakshman is the one who tells him that, okay, this is not the time to get angry. Your reaction is too much. Don't do this. Like, when Ram is trying to destroy the entire Samudra, because Samudra is not giving them way, it is Lakshman who says, no, 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 don't, this is overreacting. Don't be so harsh. Yeah? Don't be so harsh. And he stops him from pulling his arrow. So, yeah, Lakshman is that central character. And for me, I think I also did not know Lakshman this well till I actually studied Valmiki Ramayana. How people work in the background to make success happen. Lakshman is that character. Hanumanji is very interesting. Yeah, and Hanumanji, so Hanumanji is the minister, is the friend, minister, call him whatever, of Sugriv. So as committed, he is extremely committed to Sugriv. That is one. With Sri Ram, they have a mutual admiration, because Hanumanji, while in normal parlance we call him Buddhimatam Varishtham, we don't really know what he did to be called Buddhimatam Varishtham. But that comes out, Buddhimatam Varishtham in the sense, the greatest amongst the intelligent ones. And that comes out beautifully in Valmiki Ramayana. The very first incident when they actually meet, when Ram and Lakshman are in Kishkindha, and Hanuman is actually sent by Sugriv to see who these men are, because Sugriv is very, very scared that actually Vali had sent them to kill Sugriv. Yeah. So that first encounter between Ram, Lakshman, and Hanuman is beautiful, and Ramji is impressed with the way this person talks, how smart he is, how intelligent he is. Yeah. And that intelligence shines throughout the way when he goes to Lanka, the way he tries to look for Sita. And the beautiful, again, we were talking about parts of Valmiki Ramayana, the interesting parts of Valmiki Ramayana. Valmiki ji actually talks about what is going on in their head. How are they thinking? How are they taking decisions the way they are taking? And that is fascinating for me. There are times when he's almost giving up because he can't see Sita, and he pulls himself out of it and still looks around, because he's like, no, no, this is what I need to do. After finding Sita, he could have left immediately. But he's like, no, a war is imminent. A war is going to happen. Now, if the war is going to happen, I need to understand how strong Lanka is. So even though that was not in his job scope, he tried whatever he did. He did all that he could to find out. He did the SWOT analysis of the Lanka army. How? By the whole Ashoka, Lanka Dahan, and all of that, right? So just to figure out how strong they were, and he comes back and he gives all that information to Sri Ram. So throughout we see that even in the war, of course, he's a great warrior and stuff. They all the Sugriva's army, they fight with their hands and stuff. They don't have any kind of weapon. There is not even a mention of a gada. So that's another fascinating thing. We tend to see Hanumanji with a gada, but there is no gada in Valmiki Ramayana. Anyway, so that is the character of Hanumanji. Yeah, it is actually a very intelligent character. Is there bhakti to some extent? Yeah, but that is only one part of it, which comes from his admiration of Sri Ram. But on its own, he is a character who is extremely sharp, who knows what needs to be done well. Yeah, and actually well read, well educated as well. And this is what even Sri Ram says, that this cannot be a person who's not studied the Vedas. So he's clearly one of those who studied the Vedas, Vyakran, all of that, and was extremely good at what he did.
Yeah, so strength and intelligence. I mean, that's quite an enviable mix, right? You also talk about some lesser known stories. At least I wasn't aware of them, right? How Kaushika becomes Rishi Vishwamitra, the Brahma Rishi. Right, that's a fascinating story again. And you also talk about Ahalya and Gautama and so on. So, what are some of these lesser-known stories within the Ramayana that may not be, apparent to someone, who has probably seen the television serial or, from a cursory reading of, certain modern interpretations?
So the Vishwamitra story, I will, because I think I'll take half an hour if I have to talk about the story. It's a fascinating story about how a king becomes a rishi. and what that entails. What does it entail to become a rishi? Yeah, how he achieves control over one sense of his, one by one, and falters and still proceeds and eventually gets where he is, where he becomes Vishwamitra, the one who gave us the Gayatri Mantra. Yeah, he's the drashta of Gayatri Mantra. So I think it's a very fascinating story, and I would urge everybody to read it. The other story which I'm going to talk about is the Ahalya story, because it is important again from a narrative perspective. Yeah, people tend to say Ramayana oppression on women. Why? Because Ahalya was punished, Indra was not punished, and then she was made a stone, and Ram was touching the stone. He put his foot on the stone. So if somebody looks at it from a bhakti bhav, it's like, oh wow, Ramji ne tar liya Ahalya ko. But when somebody looks at it without Shraddha, they'd be like, oh, what is this? This is like insulting a woman. Yeah. But what was that story really? Yeah. Again, because we don't know enough, or we tend to go by the retold stories, these things happen. In reality, it is very clearly mentioned that Ahalya knew what she was doing. Yeah. She fell into that trap of curiosity because she knew that Indra aspired her. Yeah. So she fell for it. And Indra also, of course, Indra wanted that anyway. So it is a mutually consented relation that they have, which eventually Gautam finds out. So Gautam punishes both. He punishes Indra, he punishes him to become impotent, and he punishes Ahalya as well. But to Ahalya, his punishment is not to become a stone. That is not what he's saying. He wants her to do prashchit. What is prashchit? Exactly in a way what Vishwamitra was going through, right? Gaining control over your senses, your impulses, your desires. So because loyalty, fidelity mattered, it matters even to date, right? Why just then? It matters even today. Are people okay with their partners sleeping around? No, they are not, right? So he says, you do prashchit living alone in this hut in such a way that nobody will see you. And eventually, when Ram comes, that would mean that it is the end of your tapasya. So she is doing her tapasya there. She is not a stone or anything. When en route to Mithila, when Sri Ramji sees this hut, and he asks Vishwamitra that who is in there, and Vishwamitra says there is a tapaswini over there, a yashaswini, a yashaswini who's devi like, who's goddess like. Come see her and touch her feet. She's much older. She's done tapasya for so many years. She has cleansed herself. She has achieved control on her senses. That is what makes you powerful and great. Hence, he tells Ram, go touch her feet. Get her Ashirwad. That is how Ram and Lakshman go. They hold her feet. And she's also, of course, happy because that means that it's the end of her Rashchit and Gautam comes. So, this is the story of Ahalya. Again, I'd say it's worth a read because it shows that nobody is doomed forever in Sanatan Dharma, in a Sanskriti. Yeah, it is understood that women both can be overcome by impulses, by their senses, but there is a way out if they are willing to put in the effort. So nobody is doomed for life. There is always a way out if people are willing to put in that effort, are willing to do the prashchit, but the eventual goal is to achieve Indriya Jaya, to achieve control over your senses and over your mind.
Yeah, I think that to me is the kernel of all of these epics as well, right? I mean, the fact that so many of the conundrums, so many of the dilemmas are modern day dilemmas as well. Yeah, I mean the characters are so complex. They had to make the same decisions that perhaps some of us are facing today. Your book, again, does a fantastic job of making all of these things very relatable to lay people like me. So thank you again for writing this book, Ami. I mean, I really had a great time reading it. And I definitely will be going back to it and reading a few more things in detail. To end things, what do you hope that the book achieves?
So I do hope the book one clarifies Ramayana for what it is, especially as I said around social narrative building. I hope we can understand the characters of Sri Ram and Sita for what they are, and our Itihaasa for what it is, rather than trying to dismiss it one way or the other. That is one key hope. And the second I would say is I really wish we as a generation and the coming generation learns more of Sanskrit, reads our texts for what they are, yeah, rather than depending especially on foreign authors or retellers to tellers to mislead them. So it is very important in today's day and age to be able to read our texts for what they are. And I hope this excites people enough to say, okay, let me go back to Valmiki Ramayana or Vyasa's Mahabharata and see what does it have to offer, which I might not have captured in the book. So yeah, if that happens, if people, and some people have come back and told me, they're like, no, we are definitely going back and reading Gita Press Ramayana. I'm like, yeah, that's the way to go. That makes me really happy.
So yeah, I think your book certainly does that. I mean, there are more than a few rabbit holes that I want to get into. Explore aspects that you've mentioned in the book. And again, thank you so much for writing this book. I think it's a must read. I urge all listeners to definitely check it out. We'll link to it in the description as always. So thank you so much, Ami. I mean, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for being on Bharatvaarta.
Thank you so much for having me again. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Bharatvaarta podcast. If you want to see more content like this, then don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We started Bharatvaarta to facilitate long-form discussions on politics, policy, and culture. We don't necessarily endorse anything that was said in this episode. If you wish to offer us feedback, do reach out to us on social media. We are at Bharatvaarta on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You could also get in touch with us on our website www.bharatvaarta.in. The links are in the description below. Until next time, stay safe, take care, and Jai Hind.